They told me I was sentimental. They told me I was stuck in the past. But the truth? They sold my heartbeat and called it a house. I can still see it if I close my eyes. The white clapboard siding, a little weather-worn, the porch swing that squeaked on windy nights, the oak tree in the front yard that dropped acorns like tiny memories on the driveway. That was where I learned to ride my bike. Where I spilled hot chocolate on the carpet and tried to hide it with a rug. Where my mother sang while doing dishes, her voice low and warm. Where my father taught me how to hammer a nail straight. They sold it. I remember the day I drove by and saw the for sale sign staked in the lawn like a declaration that nothing lasts forever. It was tilted slightly to the left, as if even the sign knew it didn't belong there. People said, "It's just a building." But it wasn't. It was the smell of cinnamon rolls on Sundays. It was the hallway where I measure my height in pencil marks. It was the kitchen where we celebrated birthdays with too much frosting and too little cake. And when it was gone, it felt like a chapter had been ripped out of my story mid-sentence. I didn't fight for it. I couldn't. At 24, I didn't have the money, the stability, or even the courage. I was still trying to figure out who I was, and the idea of saving something as big as a house felt like trying to hold back the ocean with my hands. I thought I'd never see it again. But I was wrong. Fate, or something like it, was already setting the stage. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 32, and I live in Asheville, North Carolina now. But this story isn't about where I live. It's about where my soul has always lived. Because one day, years after I watched it slip away, I would walk through that same front door again. Not as a visitor. Not as someone chasing memories. But as the owner. The funny thing is, I didn't buy it to prove anything to anyone. I bought it because the walls remembered me, and I remembered them. But before I tell you how I got there, you have to understand what it felt like to lose it. Because the truth is, the house wasn't taken from me in a sudden, dramatic way. No one kicked me out in the middle of the night. It slipped away quietly, sold while I was too busy drowning in my own life to notice the tide was pulling it from shore. And yet, that loss became a shadow over everything I did for years. I didn't just lose the building, I lost the place that told me who I was. You see, childhood homes have a strange kind of magic. They're not just walls and windows. They're the only place where every version of you has lived at the same time. The 8-year-old who believed in fairy tales. The 15-year-old who cried over her first heartbreak. The 20-year-old who came back from college and slept in her childhood bed, even though her feet hung over the edge. That magic doesn't transfer when you move somewhere new. When the house was gone, my world tilted. I became restless, moving from apartment to apartment, city to city, as if searching for a feeling that could never be recreated. I'd walk past other people's houses at night when their windows glowed with warm light, imagining their dinners, their conversations, their laughter. And I'd think, that used to be me. People thought I was fine. They didn't see how that loss was stitched into everything I did. And if I'm being honest, I didn't think I'd ever feel whole again. Not until the day I found myself standing on that old street, my car slowing as I passed the familiar curve in the road. The oak tree was still there, taller now, its branches reaching even further into the sky. The porch swing had been replaced, newer, cleaner. But I could still hear the faint creak in my mind. And the house? The same. Different paint color. New shutters. But beneath it all, the bones were the same. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Because for the first time since losing it, I didn't just feel sadness. I felt possibility. I didn't know then how the next chapter would unfold. That the girl who had lost everything would one day hold the keys to the place where it all began. But I promise you, that day was coming. And when it did, the house would become more than a memory. It would become my redemption. If you'd asked anyone in my family when I was 18 what my life would look like at 30, they'd have told you with absolute certainty. Emily will be the first in the family to become a lawyer, my father would say, smiling with pride. She's got that stubborn streak. She'll make partner before she's 30. My aunt used to add, almost as if she could already see my name printed on a brass office plaque. It was decided for me, long before I even knew what I wanted, that I would take the right path. Stable. respectable, predictable. And for a while, I believed it. I believed in the picture they painted. Me in tailored suits, living in a city apartment, spending holidays back at the family home like a visiting dignitary. That house, the one I grew up in, was the anchor in all their predictions. In every version of my future, it was still there, standing solid on its foundation, waiting for me to return. But life has a way of laughing at your plans. I made it to law school. I made it through 2 grueling semesters before the cracks began to show. At first, it was little things, skipping a lecture because I couldn't get out of bed, pretending to take notes while my mind drifted into fog. Then it became bigger, constant migraines, anxiety so sharp it felt like my chest was in a vice, nights spent staring at the ceiling wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. I didn't just burn out. I collapsed. By the end of my second year, I was sitting in the dean's office with trembling hands, signing papers that would make my withdrawal official. When I told my parents, my father's voice went quiet, too quiet. My mother tried to fill the silence. "She's just taking a break," she told my aunts over the phone. "She needs time to think." Think. As if thinking would make me less of a disappointment. We didn't talk about it again. Not really. I got a job waiting tables at a small diner downtown. I told myself it was temporary just until I figured out my next step. But temporary turned into a year. Then 2. The conversations at family gatherings became shorter. My name was mentioned less. Sometimes I'd walk into a room and feel the air change, as though my presence was an awkward reminder of something better left unsaid. "She was supposed to be the one," I overheard my uncle say once. He didn't know I was behind him in the kitchen. I didn't correct him. During those years, I avoided going back to my childhood home. It was easier not to see it, not to stand in the kitchen and feel like I'd let the walls down somehow. But life doesn't wait for you to get yourself together. One winter afternoon, I got the call from my mother. "We're selling the house," she said, the words flat and matter-of-fact. My hand gripped the phone tighter. "What? Why?" "Your father and we can't keep it anymore. It's too big, too expensive. It's time." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her to wait until I could fix my life, until I could be the kind of daughter who could step in and take over the mortgage. But the truth was I couldn't even pay my rent on time. So I said nothing. The next time I saw the house was 3 weeks later. There was a for sale sign in the yard, planted right in front of the oak tree my dad and I had planted when I was 10. I parked across the street and watched strangers walk through the front door, their shoes leaving marks on the floors where my little brother and I used to race in our socks. One of the buyers ran his hand along the banister. I wanted to tell him my father had built it himself, that every dent and scratch was part of our family's fingerprint. But I didn't. When the deal closed, I didn't go to the final walkthrough. I didn't watch them carry our lives out in cardboard boxes. Instead, I stayed in my apartment, sitting on the floor with a mug of cold coffee, staring at the wall as if the absence of that house had left a hole in me big enough to swallow everything else. The family moved on. They adapted. My parents downsized into a smaller, newer place on the other side of town. They started using words like practical and simpler. But I didn't adapt. Losing that house was losing the backdrop of my entire life. And without it, I felt like every memory was floating, untethered, slowly drifting away. People think grief is only for death. But I grieved that house like it was a person. Because in some ways it was. After it was gone, I avoided the street it was on. I didn't drive by. I didn't want to know who was living there, what changes they'd made, whether they'd torn down the wallpaper in my bedroom or painted over the pencil marks in the hallway that tracked my height from age 5 to 17. I told myself I was starting over, that I was moving on. But deep down I knew I hadn't started over. I had simply stopped. Rock bottom doesn't always feel like a crash. Sometimes it feels like nothing. Days blurred together. I'd wake up, go to work, come home, eat whatever was easiest, and fall asleep with the TV still on. It wasn't living, it was waiting. For what, I didn't know. Then one Tuesday afternoon, something shifted, not in a dramatic, movie scene way. It was small, almost forgettable. I was working the lunch shift at the diner, when an older woman came in alone. She ordered a grilled cheese and tea, and as I set her plate down, she smiled and said, "You remind me of my granddaughter. She's about your age, but we don't talk much anymore." I don't know why that stuck with me, but it did. The next week, she came in again. And the week after. Her name was Margaret, and she told me little pieces of her life. How she'd been married for 42 years, how she loved crossword puzzles, how she used to bake pies every Sunday before her arthritis made it too painful. One day, I noticed her struggling with her phone, squinting and tapping the screen with frustration. "This machine hates me," she muttered. I laughed. "No, it just doesn't know you yet." I pulled up a chair and spent 20 minutes showing her how to make the font bigger, how to send a text, and how to check her email. When she successfully sent a message to her granddaughter, she looked at me like I'd just handed her a magic wand. "You brought my baby into my living room," she said softly. It was such a simple sentence, but it hit me like a wave. That night, I lay awake thinking about it, about how a tiny bit of help, something that took me minutes, had meant so much to her. And I wondered how many other people like Margaret were out there. People who just needed a little help to feel connected again. That thought became the first spark. I started offering free tech help sessions on my days off. I put a handwritten sign in the diner window. "Need help with your phone, computer, or email? Ask for Emily." At first, only a few people showed up. But word spread. Soon, I was teaching seniors how to FaceTime with their families, set up online grocery orders, and even join virtual book clubs. It didn't feel like much. Certainly not a career. But after years of feeling useless, it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time: purpose. Helping people wasn't fixing my life overnight. I still had bills stacked on the kitchen counter. I still felt a pang every time I thought about the house I'd lost. But I was moving. I was building something. One afternoon, a man named Tom came in, holding an ancient laptop. He said he wanted to learn how to write emails to his son, who was stationed overseas. We spent an hour typing, deleting, retyping, until he finally hit send. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "You have no idea what this means," he said. And maybe I didn't. Not fully. But I was beginning to understand something important. The things we think are small can be monumental for someone else. I didn't advertise. I didn't have a business plan. But people kept showing up. I started taking small payments, just enough to cover the time I was giving. And slowly, those payments began to add up. Somewhere in the middle of all that, I stopped feeling like a failure. It didn't make headlines. No one in my family noticed. But it mattered. It mattered to Margaret. It mattered to Tom. And maybe most of all, it mattered to me. Because for the first time since losing that house, I felt like I was building something I could hold on to. What started as a little side help for a few locals turned into something much bigger, almost without me realizing it. At first, I was just the girl at the diner who can fix your phone. But soon, people began calling me directly, asking if I could come to their homes or meet at the library to teach them. I bought a secondhand laptop, a printer, and a small rolling bag, so I could bring everything with me. I called it my mobile office, though it was really just an old tote bag with my name written on masking tape. The more I worked with people, the more I saw the real need. Some of my clients hadn't spoken to distant family in years because they didn't know how to video call. Others were scared to use online banking because they didn't understand it. And so, I started creating simple one-page guides, big fonts, clear step-by-step pictures, no tech jargon. People loved them. By the end of that year, I'd helped over 300 people in our town. Then something unexpected happened. The community center asked if I'd be willing to run a weekly class. "We'll pay you a small stipend," they said. It wasn't much, but it was steady. I agreed, and before long, my classes were packed. Word spread to nearby towns, and soon I was holding 2, sometimes 3 classes a week in different locations. I kept track of my numbers out of habit, not to brag. 1,200 seniors taught in a single year. A waiting list of 50-plus people for the next month's classes. A 78% follow-up rate from students who wanted more sessions. It was working. I was working. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't worried about making rent. I started saving small amounts at first, then more each month. But here's the thing. While the community saw me, my family didn't. When I tried to share what I was doing, the responses were polite but dismissive. That's nice, my mom would say, before changing the subject to someone else's promotion or engagement. My brother once laughed and said, "Teaching old folks to click buttons? Real noble work." The worst was at Thanksgiving. My uncle, after hearing about my classes, shook his head and said, "You've always been the free spirit. Not everyone has to have a real career." I smiled through it, but inside, it stung. They still saw me as the girl who dropped out of law school, the one who didn't finish what she started. It didn't matter to them that I was making a living on my own terms, that I was changing lives in small, meaningful ways. So I stopped talking about it. Instead, I poured everything into my work. I learned new teaching methods, upgraded my equipment, even hired a part-time assistant named Kayla to help with scheduling and materials. Kayla once told me, "Emily, you're building something real here." I knew she was right, but part of me still wished the people who mattered most could see it too. I didn't realize then that the validation I wanted was coming, just not from where I expected. 3 days later, Emily stood in the middle of her kitchen, the morning sunlight pouring through the windows, bathing the room in a golden hue. She had been restless since that phone call with Daniel. She had replayed his words in her head, over and over, like a haunting melody she couldn't turn off. Daniel had sounded different. Not the confident, calm friend she knew. There was a tremor in his voice that hinted at something urgent, something he was holding back. And although he had assured her everything was fine, Emily's instincts screamed otherwise. She sipped her coffee slowly, but her mind wasn't on the taste. It was on the unease bubbling inside her. That's when her phone buzzed on the counter. The screen lit up with a name she hadn't seen in months, Mark Reynolds. Emily froze. Mark was an old coworker from her time at the marketing agency in Chicago, and they hadn't spoken since she'd left the company. The last time they had talked, it was about Daniel, specifically about a risky deal Daniel was supposedly involved in. A deal Emily had brushed off as gossip at the time. Taking a deep breath, she answered. "Mark? Hi, it's been a while." His voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "Emily, I didn't know if I should call, but you need to know something about Daniel. I think he's in trouble. Big trouble." Emily's grip on the phone tightened. "What kind of trouble?" Mark hesitated. She could hear him exhale. "There are rumors, dangerous ones, that he's gotten tangled up in something with the wrong people. And if what I've heard is true, it's not just his safety at stake. Anyone close to him could get pulled in." A chill ran down Emily's spine. She leaned against the counter, trying to steady herself. "Mark, are you saying I could be in danger?" "I'm saying be careful," Mark replied firmly. "And if Daniel reaches out again, ask him the questions you've been afraid to ask." The call ended abruptly, leaving Emily in a thick silence. She stared out the window at the quiet street, the world outside moving at its usual pace, while inside, her reality shifted. Her heart pounded as she thought about Daniel's sudden reappearance in her life, his vague explanations, and now this warning from Mark. Emily knew one thing for certain. This was no coincidence. That evening, Emily sat in her car outside Daniel's apartment complex, her fingers drumming nervously against the steering wheel. She hadn't told him she was coming. Part of her feared he wouldn't let her in if she did, and part of her wanted to see his reaction when she appeared without warning. The air felt heavy, charged with something she couldn't name. Finally, she got out and walked up the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the dimly lit hallway. When she reached his door, she knocked once, then again, firmer this time. Moments later, the door creaked open. Daniel stood there, looking startled, as if he'd just seen a ghost. His hair was disheveled, and his eyes darted briefly to the hallway before landing back on her. "Emily, what are you doing here?" She crossed her arms, meeting his gaze. "We need to talk. And I don't want half answers this time." He hesitated, then stepped aside, motioning for her to come in. The place was cluttered, papers scattered on the table, a half-packed duffel bag by the couch, and an open laptop displaying what looked like financial spreadsheets. Emily's eyes narrowed. You're leaving? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Emily, I didn't want to drag you into this. It's dangerous. Her pulse quickened. Dangerous how? Because from where I'm standing, you've been keeping something huge from me, and now people are warning me about you. Daniel's jaw clenched, his voice low. I owe money to people you don't want to know about. Bad people. I tried to fix it, but things spiraled, and now they're watching me. I thought staying away from you would keep you safe, but when I called the other night, it was because I realized they might come after you to get to me. Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her. Daniel, you should have told me from the start. I couldn't, he said, his voice breaking. I didn't want you looking at me the way you are right now. For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then Emily took a deep breath. Running isn't going to solve this. We need to go to the police. Daniel shook his head instantly. That'll only make things worse. They have people everywhere. The only way I can fix this is to give them what they want. Her heart pounded in her ears. She knew that whatever they wanted would cost Daniel everything. And if he failed, it could cost him his life. But as she stood there, looking at the man who had been her closest friend and the person who had once saved her in ways he didn't even realize, she made a decision. If you're going into this fight, you're not doing it alone. Daniel's eyes widened. Emily, I can't. Yes, you can, she interrupted firmly. You pulled me out of the dark once. Now it's my turn to pull you out. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, a storm brewing on the horizon. Inside, a fragile but unshakable alliance had been forged. Emily didn't know what the coming days would bring. Danger, lies, and maybe even betrayal still lurked ahead. But she knew this much. She was ready to fight for the truth, no matter where it led. And somewhere deep down, she suspected that this was only the beginning.